This conference will now be recorded.
Fun with buttons.
That threw me off. Okay. On the agenda, what I'm trying to do is go to those items that I do not think are going to be controversial, have a lot of conversation, and we can move through them rather quickly. So I'd like to have somebody move Resolution 2020, the approval and authorization of the special appropriation in the amount of $216,000 and change by way of transfer from the debt fund to the revenue line for the fiscal year 21 budget. Lisa moves, Stacy seconds. Okay. Where did I put it? Okay. This is copied right from the Board of Finance. So it was approved by the Board of Finance on their May 14th meeting. Town issued $21,060,000 of new bonds in April 2020. It received a premium of $4,120,303.90. A portion of the premium will be capitalized for the first interest payment for the Ox Ridge School project. The loan was associated with Ox Ridge, which will occur in August 2020. The request for special appropriation will appropriate the portion of the premium to be used for the first interest payment to the multi-year debt service fund. And then they established a 2021 budget revenue line to accept this. The remaining premium, $110,000, will be used to cover the issuance costs, and that leaves approximately $3.8 million, which will be used to reduce future borrowings on Ox Ridge. Any other discussion on this?
Can somebody just send it to me? I never got it, Jack. Did you send it out?
I didn't either.
Okay, I'll send it out right now.
Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't get it either.
Yeah,
Okay.
she was going to send it out, but I never got it from her.
No, that may have been, it may have been the last one that I did, that's why.
Jack, I think this resolution when you sent it out was labeled 20-X.
Oh, yes, okay, but it
So
should be
I think
20-20.
Yeah. So I think
I didn't have what the number was at the time.
Okay.
I don't know if I.
If you can resend it, Jack, that'd be great.
Yeah, and send it to me too.
Okay.
I'm sending it to the whole team.
Thank you.
So, Jack, it's number 2 on the agenda, right?
No, it should be number 1 on the agenda.
Number 2. One's
Well,
called
number 1's called order.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
okay, yes.
yeah.
Number 2 on the agenda, I forgot about the call to order. Yes.
But it's 20-X there. Yeah.
Okay, it's been sent.
Mike, I'm just making sure you're checking the attendees. I see Mark Adeletta joined us.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Let me know if
Yeah, I didn't get it yet.
Mike James Howe is here as well.
Thank you.
got it.
Got it, Jack. You got it.
Okay, I'll let everybody read it. Since I'm assuming everyone did not attend the Evelyn Wood speed reading course.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions?
And how many out of 17 are present?
16.
Thank you.
While we're waiting, and Martha, I'd like your input on this. This wasn't on the, this was approved by rules, but I think even rules, we made a mistake because we were going to do it after the budget. But I think we need to move to have this resolution 2020 done prior to the budget because it's included in the revenue line in 2015. So would you agree that we probably need to vote on this and move it prior to going to the rest of the budget?
I guess so, on that basis.
Yeah. By the way, I do have to say to Mark, thank you very much for recording the guests at the Rules Committee meeting. I got a big kick out of it.
We have an unidentified caller 3 on the.
You're welcome, Jeff.
Bob Lyons just joined on the phone. I'm having trouble going over my computer.
Oh, okay.
All right. So are we ready to vote on this?
Yeah.
Okay. All in favor? Maybe I'll do it the reverse way. Is there anybody opposed to this resolution? Is there anyone who wants to abstain from this resolution? Hearing none, I'll take it that the resolution passes.
Well, who had moved the resolution? Jack?
Lisa moved it, Stacy seconded.
Okay.
All right, next on the agenda.
Jack, excuse me for a moment. There's another caller on the phone. Could you identify yourself, please?
Probably it's Luisa Brackman because it dropped the call.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, this is a standard resolution that we do every year. It gives the Board of Finance the right to refinance rather, through issuance of bonds or amounts available in unassigned fund balance.
Excuse me, Jack, which resolution is this?
20-16.
Got it, thank you.
So I need somebody to move it.
I'll move it.
Mike, I need a second.
I'll second.
I heard Louisa.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay, let me pull it up. By the way, I have made certain corrections to these documents. I will send them out for review subsequently. And I appreciate all the other eyes that have looked at it to catch little typos and other things. So, this authorizes or allows the Board of Finance to go and issue debt that have been bonds that have been issued from 2012 through 2020. Based upon a document that I just got from Jen, the current outstanding bonds for the end of the year will be 68 million and 68.9 million. You will see in the schedule that I forwarded that we will have significant payoff of bonds over the next couple of years. So even with the final issuance of additional funds for the Oxford School, we will still be under 100 million, probably under 80 million in total, depending upon what other things get bonded. Again, this has been something that we've done every year for probably the last 8 or 9 years. Are there any questions on this? Hearing none, are we ready to vote?
Jack, I have a question.
Sure.
Is it our purview to make suggestions or guidelines on when and when they should be doing refundings, like setting savings targets and things of that nature?
I don't think our purview is to tell them what to do, but I think we can always make suggestions to them, and whether or not they're open to hear said suggestions would be up to the Board of Finance.
Okay.
But it's always a worthwhile exercise. If you see certain things, you know, for me, I can use Bonding for Dummies book, but I know that there are several people in this committee who have vast knowledge of this. And, you know, those type of conversations that you may want to have with Jen or even with John Zagroski, be my guest.
Jack, and as you've written here, the Board of Finance still has to come back to the RTM for approvals?
No, not on these. In this
Do we have any
particular
concern
case-
about that?
16, correct?
I'm sorry?
This is 20-16, correct?
That's
Right.
correct.
Okay,
But
thank you.
last October, we revised the same resolution to allow for the use of unassigned fund balance. And quite honestly, these are opportunities that they should be able to do without having the RTM get involved, simply because we don't want to lose, based upon our monthly meeting, an opportunity. So, you know, there's a certain amount of trust that we have to have that they know what they're doing. So, and besides that, it gets reported, so we would know if they are doing this. Any other questions? Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
Okay. Anyone opposed to this resolution? Any abstentions? Resolution carries unanimously. Next resolution, item 4 on our agenda. Discuss and take action on resolution 20-17, consideration and action on the appropriation of $503,000 for sidewalk repair and replacement, and authorizing the issuance of bonds and notes in the amount of $503,000 to meet said appropriation. Can I have somebody move that motion?
Lisa.
Lisa, thank you.
Iris, did you second it?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Thank you. You will notice that we have separated out the sidewalk, the 2 sidewalk projects. That's because this one is repair and replacement throughout town. In the book from the Board of Selectmen, when they wrote up their the budget on the Capitol, they put down that these sidewalks last for 30 years. I think that's a little optimistic, but even so, it still is within the 10-year time frame, and we can have different maturity dates on any notes. The $500,000 is for the sidewalk repair. $3,000 will be for issuance costs. And while we estimated, Jenny was kind enough to do an estimation for this over a 10-year current rate. to come up with approximately $54,000 per annum. The Board of Finance has already notified us that they would intend to include this resolution 2017 and 2018, which we'll deal with next, as part of a larger funding for the next round for Oxbridge School. Obviously, the terms and conditions changing would affect that $54,000, but it's a pretty good estimate of what it's going to be. Jenny, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that part's pretty straightforward.
Okay. Are there any questions, comments? Hearing none, are we ready to vote? All those opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none of the other two, this passes unanimously. Item 5, discuss and take action on Resolution 20-18, consideration and action on appropriation of $1,015,000 for various capital projects, authorizing the issuance of bonds and notes in the amount of $1,015,000 to meet said appropriations. Do I have somebody moving this? Stacy?
Peter?
You have a, oh, Peter? All right, sorry,
Peter
I'm not
moved.
looking.
And Stacy?
Yep.
Seconded, yeah? Sorry,
Mike, I'm
Lisa.
gonna let you do that. Your eyes are better than mine.
I'll be happy to do so.
Thank you. Okay. Capital improvements included in this, upgrade of the heating control system at Town Hall for $170,000. The conversion of the Norotan Heights Fire Department to natural gas from a combination of oil, electric, and propane for $165,000. There is a note here. In prior years, $60,000 was accrued for the Norotan Heights natural gas conversion, even though it wasn't going to take place for a number of years. The full project cost, this is one of these non-lapsing accounts that have been set up. The total cost of this project is estimated from Kate and Jen to be $225,000. They're applying the $60,000 that's already in the reserve fund for capital non-recurring assets, and the remaining amount of $165,000 will be bonded. There's the construction of the new tennis courts for Darien High School. I'm not giving you the pennies on this, but it's approximately $525,000. And then the installation of 350 feet of new sidewalk on West Avenue for about $75,000. The comments are, please note that there's a need to separate new sidewalk construction from the replacement of existing sidewalks. In addition, there is $75,000 for the replacement of windows in the town hall gymnasium. Approximately $100,000 had already been budgeted, so the total project is for those two areas was $175,000. During the budget conversations at the Board of Selectmen, Ed Gentile happened to mention that he's doing those. We still have to do the larger windows behind the backboard that has that whole wall. That's probably another $100,000, which would be anticipated in future years. The issuance cost associated with this debt is $4,632, to be exact. Again, Jenny was kind enough to do some analysis on this, and depending if it's a 10-year or 20-year bond, the estimated annual interest and principal costs are expected to range from $64,000 to $108,000, based upon if it's a 20-year bond or a 10-year bond. I have to change the numbers that I wrote there because that doesn't make sense the way I wrote it. Those are basically the items that we have included in this bonding resolution. Are there any questions? Any comments? Are we ready to vote? Okay, are there any no votes? Are there any abstentions? Hearing none, I'm assuming that this passes unanimously. So that was all good. We got done with half of our meeting, I guess. So now let's move to 20-15. Consideration and action on the July 1st, 2020 to June 30th, 2021 budget recommended by the Board of Finance as follows. And then we have all the things that we have always voted on each section individually. I did want to give a little bit of a preview to talk about how I was thinking of writing this, because I think some things have been lost with everything else has transpired. You know, we started off this budget season fairly well. We had very good conversations with the Board of Selectmen. Didn't mean we agreed on everything, but they were moving forward. And same thing with the Board of Ed. If we looked at the two budgets and understanding where we were very early on, the explanation was very easy that a significant part of the Board of Selectmen budget, I want to get to a particular spreadsheet. A large part of the increase in the Board of Selectmen budget was about 600,000 plus that had to do with the changing of the life expectancy, the earnings rate, and there was one other aspect having to do with the pension, since apparently municipal employees live longer than the rest of us. So their overall increase, which started out at about 3.4%, 3.7% rather, was significantly reduced to being under 2% if you took away the change in the pension plan. Similarly, the Board of Education had about 300,000, or equal to about 25 basis points of their proposed budget. And they predominantly had a large increase in their healthcare costs based upon the fact that there happened to be several participants in the pool that have some significant illnesses or costs. So that reduced it as well when we're looking at it. I'm not saying that any of us were happy with the 3.4% increase, but it was reasonably explainable, and we thought that, as has been said, for the most part, on their operating budgets, that the amounts were reasonable, and we understand that there needs to be some flexibility in both budgets as you're starting a budget process in a November, December timeframe, and we may not be able to always get the, know everything that's going on. That would have been our budget, except a pandemic happened, several executive orders happened. We had to first establish that we still had the right to vote. There were certain other determinations made by the Board of Finance on a mechanism to how they were going to allocate and coming to a zero expense growth as well as a zero mill rate growth. And for the most part, the RTM was excluded from participating in any of these. And that was quite disappointing. That being said, there's nothing we can do about that now. So we've expressed our discomfort with that. If you look at it, we did state to the Board of Finance that we didn't agree with the methodology. That's where we were. So, but we also wanted to, and I was working with the Board of Finance to try and get the cleanup of the reserve fund for capital non-recurring items in this budget cycle. There are, in my opinion and review of the documents, a number of things that we could call non-lapsing accounts. An example, we accrue for the reval. It's about 60 grand a year. Prior to the pandemic, we raised the issue that this accrual wasn't in the budget. I also knew that we over accrued by $127,000. Instead of changing the $127,000 and returning some of the money to either the contingency or reallocating to another capital account, those funds are just sitting there.
Yep.
The Board of Finance can't do the RTM can't do anything about it other than request that changes are made. Also in February, I came across $167,000 that was labeled Board of Finance, Public Works, Infrastructure Reserve, which hadn't been used for 8 years. In conversations with both Kate and Jen, we were able to have the Board of Finance move that into their contingency in that fund in the February timeframe. The conversation to not address these during this exercise of trying to reach either a zero mill rate or a zero expense rate, in my opinion, has a lot to be desired. So that's where I want to just start saying, look, there's not a lot we can do about some of the decisions they've made. They made it, it's done. But we do want to address some of the ones where they seem to have missed a couple of things. And so those are the ones that I might propose later, but I'll let anybody else have a conversation first before we move forward. Anybody else?
Are you inviting general comments right now, Jack?
Yep. Because I got to write something up, so I'll take the general so we can put something together.
I'll be happy to start, and a summary of my notes I forwarded to Mike before the meeting started, so they'll be entered into the record. I'm perplexed. In very simple terms, I just don't get it. I don't get what the Board of Finance has done here. I understand that the Board of Finance, articulated interest in exploring this, what I like to call zero tax goal. Okay, we want to, and that's we actually, as a committee, endorse that specifically with the zero mill rate. But generally, we understand we're trying to be careful and prudent in the current environment. I applauded the fact that the Board of Finance said they did not want to cut into services. That should be focused on deferments of capital projects. And also, the Board of Finance stated that they were going to defer to the Board of Selectmen and Board of Education judgments as to the qualitative assessments of the budget provisions. They weren't going to substitute what they thought would be good cuts or bad cuts or what the impact might be. And they also created the allocation formula that we've all talked about. We know is, at least in our point of view, when we met before, is deficient, and creates more problems than it solves. We know that both boards, the Selectmen and Board of Education, responded to these requests. The Board of Selectmen assessed that they could reach their savings goals solely by capital deferments. There were also identified significant areas for other capital deferment savings beyond the ones that were the levels requested. The Board of Education assessed that it could not reach those savings solely by capital deferments, and there likely would be cuts to substantive programs, which, again, the Board of Finance said they did not want to get to. So we had our meeting on May 4th. I thought it was very productive. We endorsed the prudent tax approach to this current fiscal year. We supported the focus on deferments, all those, and deference to qualitative assessments from the relevant boards and the commitment not to impact services. I think we worked very hard to produce a plan that actually achieved the Board of Finance's goals within their guidelines. That is, not getting into required reductions to operating budgets. And we forwarded that to them. This plan, I think, was really important because, again, it avoids impacting town services, period. So, unfortunately, the Board of Finance came back and, at a couple of meetings and recommended, adopted the Board of Selectmen's recommended savings, which were met via their capital deferments, but adopted cuts to Board of Education beyond the available capital deferments, despite Board of Ed representations about the negative impact on services.
I don't know.
Specifically, the Board of Finance made,
Look, I'm not on.
for all intents and purposes, qualitative assessments about what should and shouldn't be cut. At one point, the board of, represented that they made their own judgment as to what the impact on education services might be during that time, and I think that was unwise. And the RTM Education met last night and voted for the budget begrudgingly, almost as a vote of protest, knowing that rejecting the budget would be self-defeating. I think some of these issues. So I'm concerned about the fact that, at least from my optics, the Board of Finance has imposed cuts on the Board of Ed outside the scope of their own criteria. They are going beyond capital deferments, and that was based on the formula they set up. Again, it's caused more problems than it ever solved. And this committee provided the Board of Finance with a complete roadmap on how to avoid making any cuts beyond capital deferments and other things like the recurring capital accounts that we're going to talk about later. So I think the RTM and the Darien residents should really understand this, that the Board of Finance has failed to work within its own guidelines, and they have not, and they are impacting town services, and they have not deferred to the Board of Selectmen and Board of Education assessments about that impact. I was particularly taken by the Board of Finance's attempt to minimize cuts, the impact of those cuts, by claiming, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the proposed cuts are, the equivalent of giving up 50 cents out of $104 in one's pocket. I think that attempt fails. It can only be true if one had full discretion to spend the entire $104, which it doesn't. The Board of Finance knows that only a fraction of the Board of Education operational budget is discretionary. And we also know that the approach to the Board of Education budget really was never engaged with the Board of Selectmen budget. The claims of overtaxing on return budget surplus would probably impact the Board of Selectmen budget more than even the Board of Ed budget. So I would have liked to have seen equal scrutiny under the same criteria of both budgets, but we did not have that. I think these budget cuts are unnecessary. Period. That's it. And I don't get why we're doing this. It's unnecessary. There is money out there in other areas, capital deferments, which the Board of Finance said they wanted us to focus on, and they didn't. And so I'm trying to I just don't get it. I don't understand why we're in a position where we're asking the Board of Ed to have to make substantive operational cuts when there are capital deferments and other capital recurring accounts where there's funding that could cover that shortfall, period. That's it.
I agree with you, Peter. I disagree with the process and the position the Board of Finance took. I feel certain members of the Board of Finance used a pandemic to further their personal agendas. Those members publicly stated their decisions were predetermined before they even came to the table to do any work. As elected officials, we are called to work publicly and transparently. Instead, several members of the Board of Finance chose to use their public time to attack and dismiss constituents for exercising their right to participate in the democratic process. I hope the taxpayers never forget how certain members of the Board of Finance work to avoid compromise, even collegial discussion, and that they run next year and they vote.
This is Bob Lyons. Could I make a quick comment?
Sure.
Thanks. I agree with both comments. I have a question and a comment. Jenny and I spent some time with our buddies on the Parks and Rec, and we had a couple questions on some of the items in the budget, and we got pushed back because our buddies on the Board of Finance said that they really just wanted to go with whatever the Board of Selectmen came up with in terms of their recommendations on the budget. So that's my comment. My question is, how granular can we get? Because I still don't understand, and the people that are in my district that I've spoken with still don't understand the need for things like new appliances at the Weed Beach concession stand. And this may be too granular, and if it is, I'll stand down, but I wanted to give you that comment. And Jenny, you're more than welcome to disagree or correct or redirect or whatever, but I just wanted to get that out there.
No, Bob, you and I are in agreement. I think our job on this committee is actually to be granular within reason, and at the same time holding the big picture. I'll echo Peter and Stacy's comments. I agree. I never really understood how the process that we started with in voicing our feedback and input and to the methodology, it just wasn't taken into account. And I also disagree with how the Board of Finance has, for the most part, come up with the allocations. That said, as it relates to our part, I think, Bob, maybe we'll get a little bit more into this discussion later on as we crawl into these some of these other items with what we're starting to refer to as these other non-lapsing accounts, the unexpended capital accounts. There's money and funding around that I think a lot of certainly in the Parks and Rec budget can be covered, can be funded from. And I think, that's a discussion for this committee to have as it relates. There's about $167,000 of capital projects in the Parks and Rec budget that were left intact. And quite frankly, that money could absolutely, quite a few of those things, it wouldn't hurt to defer them or pay for them out of other funds. So we can talk about that as a committee on whether we want to go deeper, because if we do that, that certainly would free up money. I think our position was, why are we taxing for this when there's money for it, and why wouldn't you taken advantage of these non-lapsing accounts to take a bigger picture so that the Board of Ed wasn't so hit so hard.
I agree with pretty much everything that has been said so far. And as talking to other taxpayers in town, the idea that there's this sort of non-lapsing accounts sitting out there, but this sort of fallow, really, that then they're being taxed in addition to pay for things that the money just sitting there that could go towards is concerning.
If anybody wants a number, there was an article that was written by a member of the Board of Selectmen that said that there was $32,980 recommended of cuts that were ultimately not taken. So even within the Board of Selectmen, there were numbers that were thrown out that could have gone to help pay for something.
Jack, I have a few just comments, kind of echoing what's been, mentioned and discussed so far. These are comments that I kind of pulled together before hearing anybody else's views, but they really, I think the other views kind of just supplement and go into what I had in the way of remarks. Could I proceed with those? Okay. First off, just some table setting remarks. Without the benefit of hearing from anybody else, I was just thinking ahead as to what would be my position relative to coming to this point in our meeting as to having to go up and down as to these resolutions. And I basically came out that I'm a qualified yes in favor of proceeding with the budget. And while this budget has certainly been challenging, successfully dealing with the pandemic has and will be proving even more challenging for the town. And my feeling is it's time to simply move on. That said, we are asked now to vote without learning of the Board of Ed's latest review, which is in process as I understand it. And reacting on a few fronts to what I've heard and my feeling that in effect, this is like a cram down budget. My vote tonight is as a committee member, and I reserve the right to change my RTM vote if new facts relevant to my vote subsequently surface. So in effect, why I view my vote as not unlike weighing in with respect to so-called called for sense of the committee. That's just some coloring as to my initial comments about being a qualified yes. I have a couple of things, just questions and listening to some of the other meetings over the past few weeks. My understanding from listening to the RTM Education Committee's meeting last night is that if we vote no, then the fiscal year 19/2020 budget would apply. Is this correct? Can anybody speak to that? Jack,
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, that's why I wanted to know. My second question is, or really observation is, my understanding is that the RTM Rules Committee back on May 18th, there was a motion that was very narrowly passed to allow the Board of Finance, the Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Ed to appear and comment at the next our annual meeting. Is this correct, Jack?
Well, let me go back to the first one. The first thing is that the budget would go back to the prior year's budget until such time that a new budget was presented to the RTM for approval.
Okay.
So there is an option then to come back and redo the budget. On the second part is that the comments were limited to a specific question to any of the elected officials, not as if they could go and participate openly and make comments to anything that was being said. If somebody said, as an example, and I believe it was limited to the chairs of the three boards, not to any member there. But if it was to say, Tara, if we cut $100,000, how would this affect you? So it would have to be a specific question on any of the items that are being done. Or, as an example, can somebody tell me whether or not it's the west side or the north side that's having additional windows put on? Okay. All right. It was not a vote to allow just open commentary. Over the last couple of years, We have not had introductions from the Board of Ed, the Board of Finance, or the Board of Education, as the budgets really are now the Board of Finance's budget. And by charter, the liaison from the Board of Finance to the RTM is this committee.
Thank you, Jack. That's very helpful. And so this leads to my next really point in my notes, and that is that knowing that the RTM just narrowly passed that, or rather the Rules Committee had passed that narrowly, with your explanation, Jack, I believe it would be prudent and advisable for the Board of Finance to explain to the RTM its thinking about how the general fund should be deployed. And more specifically, presumably the only rationale that I know of for not adopting the non-lapse account that has been proposed is out of abundance of caution, I think, by the Board of Finance for what the future may bring. Instead of that's, I surmise, is the reason for not going with the non-lapse account. But instead, what we have heard over the past few weeks are a number of reasons that have been offered for not adopting the account. The reasons have ranged from, there are really three. It would be a bad precedent. I think John had mentioned that. Second, the Board of Finance and the RTM would be relinquishing its oversight role. And also that I think it was mentioned it could only be used for capital expenditures. I think the first 2 points, A and the first and last, third point, A and C, about bad precedent and capital, I'm unaware of any statutory support for that. And that was the statute that accompanied our minutes from our last meeting that you all had. I think also as to B, which is the point about the let me see here, relinquishing oversight. I think Paul Hendrickson at one of the meetings a couple of weeks ago mentioned his experience with a non-lapse account, and I mentioned in that regard, a memorandum of understanding had been entered into, putting guardrails on, ensuring that there was going to be oversight. So I would like to just, have the Board of Finance explain its rationale with regard to the general fund, and also in doing so, explain why they believe the reserve accounts we've mentioned, we discussed already, established by the Board of Finance and itself, should not be folded back into the general fund as well, out of abundance of caution that they've given as to the reasons for not going with the non-lapse account. So, thinking about that while they're at it, I would also appreciate an explanation as to the allocation methodology for allocating the budget reduction bogeys between the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education. In doing so, it helped close one of our 4 senses of the committee back in our May 4th meeting. Final points I have are that it's been observed, I think, in a couple meetings I've heard, is that a non-lapse account only helps assure that any unspent educational money will be spent. And I think what we're seeing now under this idea of a prepaying concept that's been floated around is an example that actually not having keeping things status quo is like a use it or lose it attitude that's manifesting itself in the prepayment proposal. So I think the notion for not having a non-lapse account, for the fact that it's would encourage spending on otherwise not spent, doesn't seem to hang true. And then the final point I think Peter alluded to is, when we first heard that these cuts were like 0.5% of the overall budget of the Board of Ed, it basically, when you look into non-discretionary expenses, by my reckoning, it's not a 0.5% cut, but it's more like 4 times greater. It's over 2%. So those are my comments, Jack. I just wanted to share them with everybody else.
Mike, I agree with you about the 0.5% versus 2%. I also agree with you on the non-lapsing account. And because, unfortunately, the Board of Finance chose not to do that, I actually support the Board of Ed prepaying and pre-buying for things when that makes sense. Like, they've come up with these iPads, and the savings of pre-buying them now is $10,000. So I think they're making some really thoughtful decisions.
Yeah. Well, that reason for not having a non-lapse account, which was mentioned as to, assuring that the monies would still be spent, if you had a lapse account, just doesn't hold true. So that's the observation I have there, Stacy.
Right. And I thought I just saw that Jack.
Okay. I've had to switch to phone because my iPad just died.
Yeah,
On
Mike,
that
I'd
note,
like
I
to.
did the same thing. I switched the phone. I was having trouble with the audio on the iPad in case I'm connected twice.
Yeah, Mike,
Okay.
I'd like to amplify that. I mean, to me, in some ways, I think we're worried about this technical aspects of this non-lapsing account. I mean, it can be. I did some rudimentary Google research looking for other towns that had used the non-lapsing account, and it's just a vehicle to carry money forward to the next fiscal year. And it's very simple. And I don't understand why, given that there has been certain monies not spent, if the board and the administration has had basically found ways that money hasn't been spent, they're saving that money, they should be rewarded for it. They shouldn't be penalized for it by having that money sort of taken back. And there are people that have called for for the administration to go ahead and spend that money before the end of the fiscal year, because otherwise they're going to lose it. That use or lose mentality is not one we want to encourage. We want to encourage people to act in good faith, where their savings, to realize them when there's money to be returned at the end of the year because expenses did not accrue as expected. We want that to be encouraged, not discouraged. So, like I said, it's a common sense thing. I don't understand why everyone's. It's actually a really good precedent. It's not bad, but I don't understand.
Yeah, Jack and committee, the Board of Selectmen do have non-lapsed accounts. For example, their town hall capital maintenance reserve, their town hall renovation reserve. Like they have non-lapsing accounts on the Board of Selectmen side, so it's not a new precedent.
And that's the fact that probably concerns me the most. As I mentioned, the accrual for the revaluation is effectively a non-lapsing account. They did not close out the prior year's account. They just kept the balance going. And in fact, it reduced the Board of Selectmen budget this year, next year, and into the third year. In fact, those funds belong back to the taxpayers. So there's an inconsistency in how the Board of Finance wants to apply its own rules. And that's my concern. I believe in transparency, and I believe in consistency in how one applies these rules. That being said, I'm for closing a lot of them. So I abstained from the non-lapsing account from the Board of Ed, but I probably would now have joined Martha and Mark in voting no. I do believe that when we're talking about the general fund, that we haven't had a really fair assessment. First of all, we're starting out that the guidelines established by the rating agencies is we need to have about 12% of our annual budget in there, and we do. In fact, we're sitting with about 15%, and at the end of this fiscal year, we'll be sitting with over 17%, as I'm expecting someplace in the neighborhood, depending if certain things are pre-purchased, about $800 to $1 million coming back from the Board of Selectmen, and another 800 or so coming back from the Board of Ed. The fact of the matter is, if you've listened to John and the other conversations of what's going on, even in the most horrific situation of what's going to happen, and most of this is going to be at the school system. Are we going to need social distancing on school buses, which might double our transportation? Are there going to be compensatory amounts given out for certain special ed students? All these are up in the air. and rightfully not budgeted. But there's many vehicles which is open other than using the general funds. Number one, there's FEMA reimbursement of some of these costs. And FEMA does not distinguish between how wealthy a town is or is not. They establish the criteria, we fill out the forms, we get our money back. Number two, there's state funds that might be made available. Again, some of those may be dependent upon whether or not we have, a total financial picture. There's also the capability, if we find out that we have $1 million worth of incremental operations expenses, that we would be able to, with the Board of Finance with the RTM approval, would be able to issue a supplemental tax bill, which is more than capable of doing it. Lastly, any of the capital improvements, if it's of larger dollar amount, will most probably be bonded. So if you're looking at all those, having $7 million in there, and in fact, having of what they did not record. They didn't record several cases of income. They didn't, they still have some overfunding of some of these non-lapsing accounts. These are all issues that say that we are in good financial condition. John said that, and I want to reiterate, the town is in good financial shape. The comment that was made that when we have $600,000 of certain income returning, that's good? No, that is overtaxing our taxpayers. And so somebody needs to be representing the taxpayers here. And I have a feeling lately it's been the F&B committee. So that conversation.
Can I say
Yep.
something?
I agree, Jim.
Sure.
This is Bert. I just want to say that I understand when you have a general fund, that is mostly a liquidity reserve. I have advocated in the past that we look at these things as if you were in a corporate world. That always sharpens your view. And when you have rating agencies, they use a similar methodology to evaluate the credit risk and liquidity for municipalities and for corporates. And yes, it is important that you have these liquidity funds, even though the taxpayer would be better off if some of that or all of that would not be used for purposes other than being a reserve. So we should be careful if you say that money can be touched or should not be added to or should be substantially reduced, because that kind of money is what backs our credit and will affect our credit rating if we're just too loose with that. So we got to be careful with what we're doing here. I think that we have the general fund, and the size of it is a good thing. Okay? And if we diversify too much, everyone keeps extra funds in their pocket for other purposes, and everyone plays games with that. That's gonna help each department doing that, or the Board of Education, but it does not help the town in total. And I don't actually think it is in the interest of the taxpayer. That's just my 2 cents to that.
Bert, I agree with, wait, let me just say, Bert, I agree with you, but then there is a case of how much is too much. So we have our AAA rating. I mean, I may need, there's some things this dummy does understand about how we're rated by the credit agencies. Number one, in conversation with a friend of mine who sits on the finance committee of the Greenwich Town F&B committee, the rating agency for them says that their fund balance should be between 8 and 10%, simply because we have a very healthy grand list and our tax is mill rate is very low. That's exactly where we are now. We are not getting it because Connecticut has a different guidelines than other states. But since a predominant amount of our money is raised through real estate taxes, and we're in probably the lowest 5 mill rates in the state, and we have a rather significant grand list that is growing with the 3 developments that are well underway, which will only significantly add to that. We are not in bad shape. And I am not suggesting that we should have raided the the general fund this time out. As I said, I was not for the non-lapsing account for the Board of Ed. But there comes a time where too much money is too much money. That is why last year, the Board of Finance, when we were over 17%, chose to allocate $500,000 to reduce the overall budget. I'm not suggesting that any money should have been done here, but I'm also not just squirreling things away simply because that makes somebody happy. You know, other than that, if that was the case, then why did we exercise a 0 growth rate? In expenses, we should have taxed more so we had more at the end of the year. There's a reasonable amount. And I think 15% is very reasonable when we're sitting here with about $5 to $7 million. We're not going to see those expenses coming in because of COVID-19. We're just not.
But Jack, I think there's a very real probability that we will have to forward the Board of Ed a significant amount of money. I mean, we are where we are. The Board of Finance, made their decision. So I think we have to sort of deal with that. What's disappointing to me, and I guess we can't do it at this point, is that the reserve funds for capital and non-recurring expenses, I mean, I think you identified close to 800,000 that could have been swept back into the general fund, which have not. It also seems to me, frankly, that on the town side, there are many nice to have capital projects that could be deferred, and it's not going to have any real impact on the town next year. I mean, I really think, nobody can prognosticate, but I think our Board of Ed expenses could be very significant, and we could have some very significant expenses on the town side. So I think it is not unwise to maintain a healthy balance. And in fact, I'd like to add to it by taking and deferring some townside capital projects.
Well, Martha, I do agree with you on that. But I think I was figuring that we could end up with $2 million extra from just some down and dirty calculations on the Board of Ed side, depending upon transportation, social distancing, other things like that. So I do agree that having $5 to $6 million is not an unreasonable amount to have there. But I also believe that if we get hit and we're not getting money back from FEMA, we're not getting bonding capital initiatives, that there does come a point where you really have to bite the bullet and say, how much do we want to take out of our general fund? And how much do we want to do a supplemental tax? And so since that option is open, even though it's not the preferable one, I do think that you have to understand there's a lot of tools in the toolbox for the town to have other than just squirreling away money. And I agree. I mean, one of the things that just drives me nuts is, even though it's a small item, the Board of Finance didn't even discuss the $700,000 of incremental items that Jamie had her department chairs go and discuss and bring to the table. They didn't even discuss it, of whether or not to defer that to, which may have reduced some of the adjustments necessary to the Board of Ed. I mean, the Board of Selectmen did a good job identifying this. And so my concern is that we have an $11,000 leaf blower riding leaf blower that apparently is more important than allocating $11,000 to school, or that there's $30,000 to repaint certain tennis court lines in Weed Beach. That is more important than having $30,000 of operating expense going to the Board of Ed or to the Board of Selectmen. I mean, remember our analysis that we provided to the Board of Finance maintained keeping the civilian dispatch. We did not cut additional operations, but we accepted the adjustments to the budgets, which have always come before the Board of Finance votes. So some of the items that have been identified by the Board of Ed, some of the identified by the Board of Selectmen, always get modified in their final vote and make those adjustments. And they were coming forward. It's just, you know, it is what it is. We can't change what they cut from the Board of Ed. Having discussions of what may or may not be isn't our purview. That's purely the purview of the Board of Ed and the administration. And so I will say that I'm disappointed with how this evolved. That being said, we still have a budget that we have to look at. And there's things that we can do in order to address some of these issues. So,
yeah, Jack, I'd just like to interject and amplify what Mike said earlier, which is it would be great to have somebody from the Board of Finance explain why they ignored all of these other tools that could have been used to cover these shortfalls. And I don't see it happening. I'd like to hear about it, because if there's going to be, operational cuts, when they said they didn't want to have operational cuts, then they should be explaining why we're having operational cuts when there's all these other accounts we've discussed that have been discussed. And I concur that these accounts need to be cleaned up the way that other accounts were cleaned up in the last fiscal year. But again, why? This is all sort of common sense to me, and I continue to scratch my head as to why the Board of Finance is embarked on this path.
Peter, if that's helpful, I think where I'm standing, some of this is happening in what's called an overabundance of caution. It's the problem in front of the town is not unlike when you have your stock holdings and you have margins, you have margin calls. Normally, it's your decision. You buy as much stock as you want. You have the margin. You borrow money against it. You are on your own. But once in a while, there's a margin call, and it comes at the worst time, and then your initiative is taken away from you and it's going to the margin clerk. He will tell you what to do. So if the town ever were in a position that things are turning so badly against our finances that they have to do things that they don't want to do, then you and I are out and the Board of Finance are out. They will have to do things that nobody likes to do. And I can see where they're coming from. They might be doing more now, as might be necessary, but I agree with the general philosophy behind it.
Well, I have a little bit of concern of simply saying doom and gloom. I sent out earlier, if you recall, the Board of Finance kept on saying that the unemployment in the town of Darien was 8%. It would be nice if they learned how to read a Department of Labor chart. It's not too complicated. So it does add questions to how they were able to understand a more complicated school budget. The unemployment in the town of Darien at the end of April was 4.3%. The 8% happened to have been for the whole district, which included Bridgeport, Seymour, Derby, Ansonia, and in fact, Darien has the lowest unemployment in the whole district. Now, I still am concerned about the 325 plus people who do not have their job. I'm still concerned about people who have a reduction in income who are living in this town, because not everybody is unemployed with having a reduction of income. So we are fully supportive of keeping it at the mill rate or below and looking for appropriate savings, what's going on. But I am against propaganda where I have to rely on Twitter to put a warning, or I need CNN to come in and do a fact check after somebody talks. That's a concern. And so I'm concerned with what you want to hear, whether or not we don't need fact checks afterwards. That's all I'm going to say. So,
Hey, Jack, it's Mark.
Bert, go
I'd
ahead,
like
Mark.
to just add a couple of comments. Some good points have been made. What's driving me, and I am generally supportive of the budget. Yes, the process has its flaws for sure. I heard it said, and I was of the opinion that the Board of Selectmen, despite the flaws in the process, is acting out of abundance of caution. I wouldn't necessarily describe it as overabundance of caution, but out of abundance of caution. Primarily, I'm of the opinion or view that we don't know what the true cost of the pandemic response as it relates to the Board of Ed. I happen to be involved in three educational institutions: a university, a private K through 12 school, and also I'm on a parent group for a large public school system. And a common theme I'm hearing across that spectrum, which is different than Darien, I get it, but a common theme is they don't know what the costs are going to be, but they are going to be higher, materially higher than last year. And the reason boils down to they're trying to adjust, and I expect our Board of Ed is trying to do the same, and it's a monumental task, trying to adjust to a virtual setting, the possibility of back in in-school setting, and then I'm hearing about a hybrid. And all of those, plan A, plan B, plan C need to be put in place, and there's going to be incremental costs associated with each of them. I'm not going to pretend to quantify how much, because not a single school system I've been a party to listening to has a grasp on that yet. And so what I put a lot of weight on was the fact that the Board of Ed was trying to hold the line on this budget. On the town side, I'll touch on that in a moment. I took at its face value the offer that was made to both First Selectman and Dr. Adley to come back if the budget, the operating budget in particular, as proposed, is unworkable, unreasonable, and the Board of Finance would consider it. I've not heard anything about that on this call. Maybe folks just dismiss that as unpractical. But to me, taking a conservative posture out of abundance of caution and then adjusting when more facts were known made good sense. I would have liked to see a bit more prudence on the capital budget on the town side. Absolutely on that. There are items on that list. A couple have been mentioned today. I won't mention specifically any, but definitely I'm of the opinion, and some of the folks I've spoken to are of the opinion, those could have been deferred. Again, taking a conservative posture, not many of those were going to impair services to our taxpayers and our residents over the next 365 days, as best I could tell. So those are sort of the highlights as to what I felt coming out of that budget process with the Board of Finance. Is it wasn't a perfect process, but it positioned us as a town from a position of strength. And the last time I'd like to touch on is the non-lapsing account. A lot of good work's been done, Jack, by you on sniffing out things that function like lapsing accounts on the town side, and I'd hate to see us swing to the pendulum the other way and propose or support the creation of or use of non-lapsing accounts, on the Board of Ed side, simply because there's things that function like that on the town side. Two wrongs don't make a right. I like the path, frankly, that you and others have been on, working with the town to reduce the use of those types of mechanisms on the town side, and hate to see a reaction that undoes that work because of the process or the end result here in this budget. So,
Mark, I agree with what you said. I fully agree with you. Okay. Do we want to go back to voting on the budget?
Yes.
Sure.
Thank you.
And I do agree with what Mark has said. I think that while the process has been fraught with a lot of politicalization, I think it's just been hard for Darien because we haven't had to face a lot of this kind of stuff before. But in the scheme of things, we're really not talking about a whole lot of stuff, and our kids are going to be fine, and we're going to be fine. And it's a good exercise that we go through all of this stuff. And the fact that we keep pursuing all of these things we find where we need to change the accounting ways is really good that our committee does that. But I think that given that the world is burning down around our ears, I think being cautious may not have been done correctly, but it's not a bad place for us to be. So let's vote.
Okay.
I actually, Jack, I struggle to on this right now because I still feel like there is a lot of things in the Board of Selectmen budget that we need to review. I see that they added $100,000 to the town hall capital maintenance reserve, and it says for COVID reasons. Now, the Board of Finance told the Board of Ed that if they had to come back, it would have to be for COVID reasons. So if we're going to tell the Board of Ed one thing, we need to tell the Board of Selectmen the same thing. So I'm not ready to vote on the budget yet.
Well, we're going to take each of the budget items line by line. So the first thing we're going to do is address the capital. Actually, the first thing, I'm going to go get my glasses so I can read it. So the first part of, we in the board, we in the F&B committee vote on each of these separately. So the first one is A, resolve that the appropriation of $2,294,845 is hereby made from the reserve fund for capital and non-recurring expenses for the purposes of meeting expenses of the town of Darien as shown by the budget this day approved. This is where we will deal with any capital items. So was I hearing a motion from,
Jack, can I interrupt for a second? This is the item where I mentioned to you that on the warning that went out, the number was 2291.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's 2,291,845. I had a typo.
Thank you.
I apologize.
Thank you.
Thank you for reminding me. So this deals with all the capital items. As I said, as I've heard, I thought that the Board of Selectmen did an excellent job, as did the Board of Ed, in identifying potential capital items that could be deferred. Some were. I do want to make comment, though, that the $500,000, if you go to the list that I put together, the $500,000 for the fire engines that were deferred is part of an annual accrual that we make. There's currently $1.8 million in the account. It had over $3 million to start the year, but we purchased a fire engine for and did a renovation on a truck for about $1.2 million. The schedule, which was included in the analysis, says that there's more than enough money to handle the next two purchases. I've had some preliminary conversations with people about whether or not we should continue these accruals going in the future and whether or not it just doesn't make more sense to change the policy that was established in the mid-1990s and in the future bond for our fire engines. So I've had just some preliminary conversations on this. This account, based upon the current planning of replacements, would have accruals grow to as much as $2 million. However, if we were to bond the 15 machines who have an average cost of $1 million, our annual expenses would never rise more than about $500,000–600,000 a year, and we could still support the wonderful 3 fire departments that do such wonderful work for our town. But this was nothing more than a change of an accrual. On the Board of Ed side, virtually all but 5 projects have been deferred. The ones that have not included 1 truck. Also, 3 areas that dealt with specifically the safety and well-being of students and the staff in our buildings. There appeared to have been a little bit of a misunderstanding between the Board of Finance and the administration. While the administration suggested that maybe they would consider deferring the $300,000 for the home HVAC, the Board of Finance initially was intending on bonding that, but the Board of Ed never voted to remove that or defer that. And somehow in the confusion, it got cut. I would suspect that we may see that return during the next fiscal year, but that again would be up to the Board of Education, and at that time it would come from the Board of Education to the Board of Finance and then on to the audit. As Stacy was mentioning, I do have, and I'm going to make a suggested amendment to this amount. I've been trying to work for 2 years in trying to clean up the reserve fund for capital non-recurring assets. We cannot deal with several of the non-lapsing accounts the only way we can deal with it if they're continuing to fund. So what Stacy mentioned and brought to my attention was there is in the capital, there's $100,000 for COVID expenses, which the Board of Finance said that was not supposed to be there from a capital side. In addition, the combination of the renovation account, there happens to be about 11 different projects for the town hall renovation that stand on their own, including the 170 that we're bonding. So they have about 199,000 plus 12,000. This probably in those 2 combined accounts, someplace in the neighborhood of $211,000 to $212,000. If we were to add the $100,000 to this non-lapsing account, that would give them, based upon their 6-year projection of usage from these accounts, over 3 years of items. I think that we can reduce the $100,000. It would still not affect anything that the Board of Ed might need to do for COVID-19 because the money's already sitting there. And so if we need to put up, guards and other things like that, I'd actually like to cut the overfunding of an account that already has money in it. And it's not going to affect what the Board of Selectmen can do because the money's already there. So that's my motion.
So Jack, help me out procedurally. I mean, right now we have for the committee resolution 20-15A, right?
Right.
So relate what you're proposing to this. Do we need to have a separate motion, I think, to reduce?
What I'm doing is to amend the amount by a reduction of $100,000 specific to cutting the amounts to be added to the maintenance account, the town hall maintenance account by $100,000, thereby reducing the capital to $2,191,845.
Okay, so we need a separate motion, I think. Somebody to
That's my
second it.
motion. I just made it.
Okay,
I
you
needed
move
somebody
it.
to second it.
I'll
Yeah,
second
I
it.
move.
Liz second. Liz, thank you. All right, so let's have a vote on this motion to amend. You want to
Well,
do
first,
the
if there's any discussion first. Is it, as I said, when I looked at the Board of Ed emergency repairs, for all 7 buildings, they have $20,000 in their budget. The only reason I'm making this is because based upon the $100,000 that they are proposing, as well as the $75,000 they would need over the next 6 years per their own analysis, they already have 2 to 3 years worth of funds sitting in there. So I'm not really cutting what their capability is should certain COVID come up. It's just cutting the overfunding of a non-lapsing account.
Jack, I don't disagree with you, but I just think, is it worthwhile to throw the sand into the machine at this point? $400,000.
Yes, because there's something else I'm going to be doing in operations later.
Jack, it's Lisa, I'm sorry, can I ask a question? Could that not be achieved by letting them go ahead and prepay expenses for 2021?
No,
And
no,
can you,
it's a different thing. It's a capital line item.
it's a capital line item.
So we have line item veto on each capital item.
Right,
right. So as I said, I would not be suggesting this if in fact it would affect whether or not they could still proceed with what they're doing. What it is reducing $100,000 of overfunding to an account that's already funded to do anything they may need to have.
Okay, so Jack, I understand this to mean when you say you have another item later on, we are trying to reduce the mill rate further. Is this the objective?
That is correct.
and Jack, I mean, when you say the other item, what is the other item? So we look at them all together.
The other item is going to be in the selectmen's operations, but they have to be looked at separately, unfortunately.
This is Beth. Let me just say, as far as, the people I've been talking to who are concerned about, the sheer amount of accounts that are around, this would certainly go towards smoothing that out so that we're not overtaxing.
Yeah, I'm looking to reduce the taxes because I am concerned. And, I've raised this account for a number of years and I just don't seem to get any traction. So I'm not looking, this isn't I've spoken to people who wanted to defer other capital items and asked them not to do that. Because I don't want to defer even that $11,000 vehicle. But this is nothing more than you already have the funds sitting in the account. We don't need to add to it. And
there's no plans attached to it.
That's correct. There's no plans attached to it. There's nothing. Every time we end up with a major project for town hall, it ends up rolling into its own project. So the combination of the maintenance and the reserve account, which has over $210,000 in it, more than covers what's going on. So this would, by adding this, they'd have $310,000, and their own budget is saying that's 3 years worth of spend. We don't need to do that. This is an easy $100,000 to give back to our taxpayers.
Jack, I'm supportive of this. It's consistent with what I voiced a few minutes ago on an ongoing effort to minimize these types of accounts.
As am I.
As am I.
Yes.
Okay, so are we ready to vote?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Mike, on this one, I'm going to ask you to do a roll call.
Certainly. Mark?
Yes.
Mark? Yes. Martha? Barry? Barry? Martha?
Yes.
Louisa? Louisa?
She got cut off. She's going to call back.
Okay.
Abstain.
Jack?
Yes.
Who was abstain? Yes.
Yeah, I abstain.
Who's that? Barry? Okay, thank you, Barry. I'm a yes. I think is James Howe here?
Yes, I'm a yes.
Okay, thank you. Beth?
I'm a yes.
Bob?
That's Bob L. Bob Lyons.
Yes.
Yep. I'm here and I'm a yes.
Thank you. Iris?
I'm here and I'm a yes. And oh, there she's back. Okay. Stacy, are you? Okay. I'm a yes.
Peter? Thank you,
Yes.
Iris. Peter? Yes.
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Stacy?
Yes.
Bert?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yeah, I'm a yes.
Okay, the only two that I have missing is I don't have anything for Louisa, nor do I have a vote for Brad. I don't think Brad's on the call. So that's 15
17.
in favor and two
And one
no
abstention.
votes.
Okay.
But two absent.
Okay. And one abstention.
Who was the abstention?
Barry, I thought was an
Barry.
abstention.
No, Barry, I thought you said yes.
All right.
Barry,
Yes.
were you a yes? You were a
No,
yes, Barry?
abstain.
You abstain. Okay, thank you.
I was an abstention. Abstain.
Thank you, Barry. I got it.
Okay, so now we are to vote on the
Thank you.
on the full item 20-15A, which is resolved that an appropriation of $2,191,845 is hereby made from the Reserve Fund for Capital Non-Recurring Expenditures for the purpose of meeting expenses from the town of Darien as shown here, heretofore, whatever it says. The on this one, since we've already made the amendment, I'll ask if there's any no votes.
Well, I have a comment if that's possible. Now,
Absolutely.
on these capital projects, replace fencing around the drill tower. Look, there is an old fence there. They said their concern were intrusions, but I never heard anything about how many intrusions they have a year. It's $46,000. I would myself have no hesitancy in deferring that for a year. I don't know how other people feel.
Martha, if you're making a recommendation to defer the 46,000 fence around the tower, I recognize that motion and I will second it. So now we can have discussion on it. Any comments?
I would agree with, this is Bob. I would agree with Martha until we get some sense of how often that area is breached. I don't see a need for it, at least in the short term.
I do have a concern on taking something away from our volunteer fire departments. That being said, I do know that some of the false alarm fees were going to be used to do some work there. So I just honestly can't recall what it was. I don't know if it was the slab or something. For those who did the fire department, I think it was Lisa and Stacy. Do you recall?
I don't think
I mean, it just seems to me, you know, the dump is shut down. There's a gate in the off hours. Somehow I don't think it's a real attractive nuisance. I just can't imagine that, you know, many people would intrude upon that. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's hard for me to fathom that deferring it for one more year is going to be a real problem. But
Stacy, I never had a discussion about it. Did you? Can hear her. Stacy? You're on mute.
and
No,
just to reiterate, okay, go ahead, Stacy.
Sorry, no, we never discussed.
No.
And just to reiterate, I kind of looked when I was last at the dump. I mean, it's an old fence and it does have some openings, admittedly, but nevertheless, there is a fence around there kind of indicating that you should not go in.
Well, I will not vote to take that out because my son is a firefighter. I think these guys are doing a great job. This department is well run. If they put it in, there must be good reasons for it. I trust them on that.
Bert, I hate to do this. Is he home that he can add some color to this?
Oh, gee.
Martha, what was the dollar amount again?
46,000.
Are there any other conversations, discussions on this point?
I'll try to look it up real quick, but
I'll wait.
may take me a minute.
That's fine.
I know I took. Well, I know, I remember the meeting and I remember they said they were concerned about intrusions, but there was no mention of, for example, how many had taken place in the previous year. So that's about all I can really add to that, so. Yeah, I'm not gonna have anything else to add beyond that. I remember the sheet doesn't have really anything more.
Are we ready to vote? Mike, can you take a roll call vote, please?
What are we voting on?
Deferring.
To defer $46,000 for the fence around the fire
Department
area.
the
Fire
tower.
department, yeah.
The tower.
Fire tower.
An amendment?
Yes, an additional amendment to the Capitol.
Thank you.
Are we proposing this or are we voting on it?
Martha moved it, I seconded, so now we're voting on it.
Okay.
Unless there's something else you want to add before the vote.
No.
Okay.
Okay, we'll start with the roll call. Mark?
Yes. Yes.
Barry?
No.
Martha?
Yes.
Louisa? Louisa? Okay, Jack?
Yes.
That's a yes?
Yes.
Okay, myself, I'm a yes. James?
Yes.
Beth?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Iris?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Stacy?
Stacy?
Yes.
Okay, you're back. Okay.
Thank you. Bert? Bert, based on your comments, I assume you're no, okay? Lisa?
Yes.
Okay. Fourteen yeses, one no, and 2 absences.
Okay.
If you're not talking, everybody mute.
Well, I thought that based upon the echo, there were 28 yeses. That was a joke.
There was double feedback. I'm sorry.
All right. I'm doing some math here right now. 219 845 minus 146 123 bump. If I had this thing. Okay. We're back to A. Resolved that appropriation of $2,045,845 is hereby made from the reserve fund for capital non-recurring expenditures for the purpose of meeting expenses of the town of Darien as shown by the budget this day approved. Are there any other amendments?
Unmuted.
Okay. Anybody against?
Wait a minute, we got to move this now, Jack.
Jack?
I'm sorry. Can
I'm
somebody
sorry.
move that?
Well, I have a question I wanted to bring up. If we want to have a discussion on making some reductions in the Parks and Rec budget based upon the recommendations Bob and I made to F&B.
I cannot stop anyone from making a recommendation. I think that ends up being pretty emotional, and what I want to do, what I'd like the committee to try and do is, I understand the 46,000. We voted on the 100,000. If nobody has any problems, I'd like to move on. I mean, yes, we could reduce the 11,000, the 30,000, but I think that these two will are appropriate in its messaging, if that's reasonable.
Jack, could we talk about the Board of Finance contingency account? Can you help me understand what that's for?
Sure. Well, I was going to talk about it in a little bit later, but there's 3 contingency accounts that exist. Right now, we're only dealing with capital. So as projects are closed and completed, in theory, they're supposed to move whatever their balance is, either over and under, into the reserve fund for capital non-recurring items, the contingency. Or if there's a balance left over, either one of the boards have the capability to request that those funds be added to another project. So as an example, I'm going to make this up, but let's say we're talking about carpet in the second floor of Town Hall that was originally budgeted for $50,000 and it ends up costing $25,000. But now we want to move $25,000 of that amount to fix the public, the windows in the gymnasium, so we can reduce that project. That can be done. So since I'm only staying to capital now, when we get to operations, I'll explain the Board of Finance contingency there.
Got it.
That's the contingency. Now, during the course of this year, that amount, and we've been having conversations with Jen and with John about reducing the amount that was sitting in the Reserve Fund for Capital Non-Recurring Items contingency, Board of Finance contingency. At one time, after the Board of Finance closed out the $167,000, the balance was approximately $1.2 million. Now, if you recall, we were all in favor of the police HVAC project, and it was time sensitive to ensure that certain items could be ordered so that the police system, including the new controls, were done for this summer, and we wouldn't experience any additional expenses or discomfort for our police. Because we did not meet in March, the Board of Finance and had conversation with me, use, I believe, some of that contingency. I believe the project was $335,000 thereabouts, and paid for that HVAC for the police department in the new system out of contingency, thereby reducing it to approximately $850,000. I'm using round numbers. $400,000 is being used when we go into the capital to pay for some of the paving that we had planned to do this year, reducing the paving amount from $950,000 to $450,000. The allocation of that $400,000 as part of the budget area is totally under the control of the Board of Finance. The RTM does not vote on that special appropriation. So it will be at the end of this planned budget cycle going into fiscal year 21. The use of that $400,000 will bring it down to about $450,000, not counting any of the cleanups or the closeout of other accounts that are sitting out there at this time. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
If I could just make a comment, the Board of Finance contingency, what is good is it can address things that have to be addressed in a very short time frame, and there's really not enough time to go to the RTM. And given what we will be facing potentially in terms of extra expenses due to the pandemic, there might be some expenditures that need to be made on kind of an immediate basis. I probably would not be in favor of reducing that contingency, since it will be down at the 450,000 level?
Well, that's simply the contingency in the capital account.
Okay.
So from there, I'm not.
All right, that's it. You're talking to, okay.
Right, I'm not in favor of reducing that any further. The one thing I will say is part of the conversation I've been having with the Board of Finance is, you know, at 1 million, it was far too much, because if you say that we had $7 million in our reserve fund for capital, call it the capital reserve, I'm tired of going through the whole name. The capital reserve had about $7 million in it. About 1.8 million with fire engines, the rest of the vehicles and other things like that, which we do accrue properly for, ends up being about $3 million. But we had about $1 million of contingency on $4 million of other projects that were outstanding, and probably another 800,000 of those other outstanding projects were non-lapsing accounts. So, you know, I think a $400,000 amount, which is about 10%, is a reasonable amount for them to have. So I'm very happy that they allocated 400,000 to pay down the paving. And I think that was good use of funds. But still, based upon the typical closeouts which happen in September, and depending upon what goes on this summer, we'll have ample funds in there should additional capital projects be needed that we're not going to bond for.
Okay.
So we're good with the Board of Finance Capital Contingency Fund?
Yes.
I just want to take a step back for a moment. I think that we might owe Jenny and Bob the courtesy of listening to their proposal and their, if they have an amendment they want to put forward, that we give them the courtesy of voting on it and listening to them.
I agree.
You got your 100,000, Martha got her 46. Let's see what they have to say. And then we go on to the next thing. I mean, you know, everybody, we all have our little issues. We all have our things, and most of them are all for the good of the town. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Iris.
I agree.
I think we
Yes.
in the category of, you know, how granular we should be getting, it was our job to get granular on this part of it. And I just want to confirm that, I think Bob and I sent around sort of a short list of the capital projects, and the major, you know, a few of them are certainly, I think we were in favor of. I think we color coded them, namely the basketball court, which was in disrepair and been in the budget for quite a while to be upgraded. I think that one's fine. I think I did see the $60,000 for the truck, and the truck is in pretty bad shape. So originally we were thinking that maybe that could be deferred, but after I saw it at the park, I was like, okay, it's, you know, the bed is rusting out and it looks like it's pretty tired. So, but I think, you know, Bob and I think pretty much agree that the Weed Beach concession, you know, that's something that we'll leave it up to, you know, this committee to decide if that's something that should be cut. It's a $30,000 kitchen renovation that would not be started until early next year, but would need to get done probably before the end of this budget cycle. And the concern was, since no one really knows what catering and food service delivery is going to look like, and given the fact that they're for such a pretty, you know, de minimis amount, there are existing capital accounts that might, or other unassigned accounts where that could be funded out of later. We just were of the opinion that we shouldn't be taxing for this. So, you know, Bob, do you want to add anything? Bob Bueller?
Bob, unmute yourself.
You may have stepped away.
Maybe we lost him.
So
May I speak?
Sorry, the other items is, Jack did point out the $11,000 blower, leaf blower, and there was about $36,000. There's a $36,000 item for the painting of tennis court lines that we thought could be deferred. So, you know, in total, 30,000 plus the 11 plus the 36,000.
I would support that.
Would support that. Okay.
So that's a 77,000
Maybe-
reduction, right?
That's right. Right. It's right. $77,000 reduction. Given the fact that there's probably some other funds that could pay for it if they really needed to get it done.
Could you talk a little bit about the 30,000 for the concession? Have they really got a firm idea on what type of equipment they want and what, if they're going to be able to bring in new vendors, or what kind of return they're looking at?
The return, so the hope was that we were not given, we asked questions. So the story went, we submitted questions to our Board of Finance colleagues back in March. Beginning of May, we heard back from Kate and Jen. They answered most of the questions. And with regard to this concession, there wasn't any detail on how many vendors or how the number came to be. They just we're relying on, they gave us no backup. We asked for the backup. They gave us no backup in terms of, where did this number come from? We're just going to trust that they went through the process of determining if that's the right number. And the issue is, the contract with the vendor is expiring at the end of this year. They would like the flexibility to put their own equipment. The town would like the flexibility to have their own equipment in there so that they can hire their own vendors. The amount of revenue they would hope to generate is about $7,500. I think they get $2,500 now. And
Yes.
with the anticipation that they would earn 75, so we'd spend 30,000 to make 7,500, so that would be paid off in 4 or 5 years ish. And there's probably some intrinsic value to be able to get chicken nuggets at the beach, but in the category of that's a really nice thing to have. I don't know that when our thought was, boy, compared to what we think the other needs are going to be, that's nice to have, not a need to have. So Martha, to answer your question, we don't know how good that number is. We're relying on the fact that it is a good number, but we think it could probably live to see another day, or come out of other funds if they determine that that's what they really want to do. We just didn't think it was appropriate to tax for it at this time.
If I might add something, during the conversation during the Board of Selectmen budget, gosh, that seems so long ago. One of the things that Jamie asked was to, for the 30,000, 5,000 of it would be used to hire a consultant to determine what would be the appropriate equipment necessary to have in there. And that would also be, because part of the problem is that the current vendor, I'm not going to mention names, and I don't think we should, but the current vendor currently owns the equipment that's there now. So because they own that equipment, they are our only vendor providing us with a bid. The thought process was to hire a consultant for, I believe, $5,000 to work and determine what equipment would be in there. That would then open it up to allow other vendors to be in there. I think you're being kind on what the payback is, but I think part of it was that there may have been an expression from the Park and Rec director that they were not happy with the current vendor. And that is part of the reason why they were looking to invest in equipment so that they had an option if they wanted to change.
Then they should take it to 5,000, hire the consultant and figure out what they really should do instead of just putting willy-nilly 30,000 in there if they can't support it.
Well, I also think
I would second that.
The current vendor contract ends at the end of this summer. So that was part of the reason why they were moving the full thing in, so that they could go out to bid during the course of the year and possibly have not sign a new vendor contract with the existing vendor that would go beyond 1 year. So I'm just providing information.
So just keeping track of the movement of the numbers, it was 77,000 reduction before. You want to leave 5,000 in for the consulting contract, that makes the reduction 72,000. So I think at this point, I'm prepared to entertain a motion to reduce the amount further by either 72 or 77, and then a second, and we can proceed with a vote.
Okay, can we go through for the 72, what are the items that we are removing from the budget?
Well, the items, go ahead.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
the leaf blower for 11,000, the tennis court lines for 36,000, and 25,000 for the concession stand.
Exactly.
Okay.
Just to, I was just looking at my notes. So for the leaf blower, I had written down that Kate said it would make the staff more efficient, just so everybody knows. And then that we don't for the Weed Beach kitchen, we don't currently own our own equipment. I think what Pam or the Parks and Rec department is hoping is that if we own our own equipment, that we might be able to get more money. But I haven't seen any data to support that.
I'm going to make a comment on the $11,000 riding leaf and sand blower. I would appreciate that they say that it makes the department more efficient, but I do believe it was originally being purchased for the 1 mile path being built on Weed Beach that currently isn't being built, because they could ride it, clean it, and other things like that. The other thing is, I haven't heard from the Park and Rec group whether or not, nor see any reductions in temp staff or overtime or any of those other areas to show that efficiency has correlated into savings, nor have I heard from them that based upon their being a little more efficient, that the following things would be done. Maybe everything would be cleaner or other things like that. So those were my concerns with the $11,000 leaf blower and the claim that it was efficient. I'll also add that during the conversation that we had with the Board of Finance members, with the buddy system, we also had Matt Patrick and members of the Park and Rec group with it, that when David Martin was part of this committee, one of the things that he had requested is a estimated work schedule. I met with the supervisor and got a rough idea of what it is. But it's one of the things that I don't think we have, not only in Park and Rec, but we haven't seen it formally in certain other areas to understand some of the staffing. So that's not to say that they're not efficient in that. I haven't had the opportunity to sit down with Ed Gentile, but I guarantee if I was there, he would be able to give me that type of analysis. I don't know, Mark, if you want to add to that, but they have a pretty good handle on what they're spending their time on. at least on Park and Rec. So,
Okay, can we vote?
Can we have a motion?
Yep.
Can we have a motion, first of all, Jen, as to a proposal to reduce it further? We have two numbers on the table, 77 and 72, I think.
I'll make a motion to propose to reduce the Parks and Rec budget by $72,000.
I
do we
second.
have a second?
Stacy, is it for, Stacy seconded, yep. Ready for a vote?
Yep.
Okay, here we go. Mark,
Yes.
Barry? Barry?
Yes.
Martha?
Yes.
Yes.
Louisa? Jack?
Yes.
Myself, I'm a yes. James?
Yes.
Beth?
Yes.
Bob? Bob? Iris?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Bill? Stacy?
Yes.
Bert?
Yes.
Lisa?
I'm a yes.
All right. We have, let's see here. I have two absences, so I think we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have 14 yeses and 3 absences. So it carries.
Okay, are there any more capital items as I'm keeping the running total?
Well, I have a question that the people that did the police budget probably can help me out with. I listened, and the e-citation software, I understand that ultimately the state is probably going to require all police departments within a few years to have e-citation software. And my one thought is, I'm concerned if we do it in advance of when we really have to do it, is the state suddenly going to decide that they want to have everybody on one system? I have no idea. So I don't know how I feel about this, but that was my initial thought. Do we really need to do this right now?
Stacy, Lisa?
I don't think that it ever came up, and I'm fairly certain that it's been decided what format to use right now, Martha. I can't confirm that 100%, but I think that it's already been
You mean do you mean the town format?
the town
No,
format.
the state.
Are you saying the state has decided on a format?
I think, yes.
If they have, I'm fine with that.
Casey?
Okay, if that's,
Yes, my recollection is the same as Lisa's.
okay, so if there is a standard format for the state, I'm okay with it.
Okay. Any other comments?
Are we ready to vote on the revised dollar amount
Yes.
for
Let me try and read
20-15A?
this again. This is almost like redfish, bluefish. I can almost do it by heart by now.
What was the dollar
Resolved
amount?
that I'm giving it to you. Resolved that the appropriation for $1,973,845 is hereby made from the reserve fund for the capital non-recurring expenditures for the purpose of meeting expenses of the town of Darien as shown by the budget this day approved. Do I have somebody moving that?
I'll move
So
it.
moved.
All right, and I'll take it that, Mike, you can decide who moved it and who seconded it.
I've already decided. I got Stacy moving and Lisa seconding.
Thank you.
Can you
Hey,
just
Are there
Jack,
any
hey,
no?
Jack, just for the
read the
record,
number
can you just
again,
go back
please?
and how you came up with that number again?
Yeah, please.
Okay. I'm starting with a balance of 2,191,845. We are reducing $100,000. Oh, I'm sorry?
When
Well,
you
I
get
was going to say,
100,000, I think you're
I
counting
looked,
100,000 twice.
No, I only
Yeah.
have the 100,000 one.
well,
Oh,
you know, I just looked at the budget, the capital budget in the newspaper, and it's 2291845.
Yes. We already reduced it by 100,000.
Okay, right, so that brings you down to 2195, less
Oh,
the
sorry.
others.
2191845. Now we have to
Yeah,
another 72,000, right?
All right,
Jack?
so I'm sorry. Yes, so it would be 100,000 for the capital, 46,000 for the tower fence, 11,000 for the riding leaf blower, 25,000 for the Weed Beach concession, and is it 36,000 for the lining of the tennis courts at Weed Beach?
So is
So
somebody doing
on
the math
that-
on this?
minus 72.
Yeah, minus the 72. So that would be 2,073,845. I did have the 100,000 in their place.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the revised amount. So let's do the vote.
Okay.
Are you at the vote, Jack?
Yep, we're good to vote.
Okay. Mark?
Yes.
Mark? Okay. Barry?
Well,
Barry? Hello, Barry.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Martha?
Yes.
Yes.
You hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. I got you.
Mike, yes.
I got you. Louisa? Jack?
yes.
Myself, I'm a yes. James?
Yes.
Beth?
Yes.
Bob? Bob? Iris? Iris? I see you, Iris.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, I couldn't get unmuted.
I know. Peter?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Stacy?
Yes.
Bert?
Yes.
Lisa?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, we have $14 yeses.
Perfect.
No, there are no no's or abstentions, so it's 14 yeses.
Okay. Next item on the agenda, 20-15B. Resolved that an appropriation for $45,365,691 is hereby made in the general fund for the selectmen's operating budget. Do I have somebody moving that?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Jen? Stacy moved, Jen seconded.
All right, anybody want to make conversation?
You have the breakout check with you about the 45 million?
You mean by which each of the departments? The answer
Yes.
is no. It's in the book.
Okay.
There have been certain adjustments to this amount. Let me go to the videotape. Hold on.
So, hang on, I'm not ready.
Okay. Adjustments to the Board of Selectmen fiscal year 21 operating budget that was adjusted by the Board of Finance. That's Schedule C if you're following on the budget reconciliation and explanation page. Civilian dispatch for $310,075 was deferred. Fire marshal software was reduced by 600. Medical and dental insurances were reduced. The medical insurance, because the budget assumed a renewal rate of 0, keeping even, and the actual renewal rate was 5% less. On the dental insurance, they assumed renewal increase of 5%, and actual renewal increase was decreased by 0.66%, resulting in a $7,900 reduction. The medical insurance was $128,482. And the last one, to cover continuation of current payments and potential increase due to seasonal and temp claims, unemployment was increased by $19,092. I do want to say that with the exception of the civilian dispatch and the fire marshal for $600, which would not have come up, in the normal course of a normal budget, the identification of the medical insurance, dental insurance, and probably unemployment would have been raised prior to the vote. So even though these were presented from the Board of Selectmen to the Board of Finance, they would have been identified by Jamie and Kate prior to the creation of this budget, as had been done in the past. Is there anybody who wants to make comment on any of this prior to me? Stacy, do you want to say anything?
So I was, again, I was just looking over their accounts. And again, I had a question about the Board of Finance has a contingency line in the operating as well.
Yep. So let me go on this area. If we exclude the library, which is approximately $3 million, the Board of Selectmen budget approximates $30 million. There's two types of contingency that the Board of Finance identifies with the Board of Selectmen budget. $400,000, which is the Board of Finance contingency, and another approximately $425,000, which is a salary accrual line. Now, the salary accrual line has been consistent for the last couple of years, and it's put in there based upon the contracts that are being negotiated with the various unions, as we have multiple contracts going on because contracts are for every 3 years, hence they move along that there's always some contract being negotiated, of which the board of the RTM would need to approve anyway. The salary accrual, if the contract is not completed in a fiscal year, that amount is added to a balance sheet. That is one of the things that Bert has been asking, and we haven't been able to get into at this time, is understanding what is on the balance sheet account for these accruals. But also, these amounts have been used for other items in the Board of Selectmen budget. This year, there was a whole conversation on limiting, I believe, the department heads to not being able to carry forward more than 5 weeks of sick pay and vacation time. And so there's a buyout, which was done on the meeting of May 14th of the Board of Finance to approve over $100,000 to buy out the vacation time that had accrued previously. Now, I agree with that philosophy of what they were using it for. It was something that had been discussed before, but the question comes about transparency. I'm not going to get into it too much because, quite honestly, again, I agree with the concept of buying out vacation time now so that somebody, when they're retiring, doesn't end up with 20 weeks at a much higher salary, which becomes an encumbrance to the town. So the concept and the philosophy is a good philosophy. How they're using the funds, that's one of their contingencies. The other contingency is the Board of Finance contingency. And over the last 2 years, they haven't used the full $400,000. This year, I think they're only at about $50,000 worth of use. I have a concern here. And my concern is based upon some conversations that I've had. I have a concern that the Board of Finance has said that they want to make sure that both the Board of Finance and the RTM's voices are heard. However, at the $400,000, including the salary, should the civilian dispatch come back in the fiscal year, which I suspect will be coming back in the first or second quarter, the Board of Finance would be able to pay for the $300,000 without ever coming back to the RTM. And yet, that's the big deferral. And in conversation with a Board of Finance member, that was a major deferral because that was a hiring of new people while at the same time they were cutting the Board of Education operating budget by about $1 million. In addition, this, without the deferral of the civilian dispatch, the increase for both budgets would not have been the same. The Board of Selectmen budget would have been much higher increase than the Board of Ed. That has me a little bit concerned. I am in favor of them having certain funds to handle certain expenses that may be arising. But if there are certain COVID-19 expenses, most of it is going to be an appropriation out of the general fund. Or if things are coming back, I want to ensure, and by the way, I support the civilian dispatch, and if it comes back to the RTM, I am most probably voting in favor of the civilian dispatch. But I want to make sure that the voices of the RTM is heard on this matter. And so I'm proposing to reduce the $400,000 Board of Finance contingency by $300,000. That would give them $100,000 to handle any of the immediate necessary things that they would need to do. I do believe there's flexibility in the Board of Selectmen budget. I'll give you an example. The police department has an all hands on deck during the 4th of July celebration. Virtually every officer in town is being used. They're being paid overtime or holiday time. As everybody may be aware, we're not doing the 4th of July celebration. And yet there was no suggested reduction to overtime for the police for that additional amount. Nor would I suggest it, because I believe that during this next coming year, such flexibility is necessary within the police budget and in the Board of Selectmen budget to be able to move funds as they see fit. So I do believe that there is some flexibility in these budgets already. I do want to remind everyone that the Board of Selectmen have been returning more money to the general fund than the Board of Ed. And, you know, I don't want to hear that it's all investment income. Joan went in front of the Board of Selectmen and said she's covering other income expenses that were over budgeted, and Joan's exactly right. So it's not the investment income that's doing it. We've been able to do some corrections over the last couple of years, but there is some flexibility in the Board of Selectmen budget, as I believe there needs to be. So I'm making a motion to reduce the Board of Finance contingency account from 400,000 to 300,000. That ensures that if the civilian dispatch comes back in, that it's going to have to come back before the RTM. And that's one of the reasons that I'm doing it. In addition,
Jack, to clarify your motion, you're motioning to cut the Board of Finance contingency account by 300, not from 400
by
to 300.
300,000.
Yes.
No, to leave them $100,000 in that account.
That's a
And they have
reduction
to
of
trust
300,
that
am I
the
correct?
RTM is going to be responsive. So that's my motion. I'm looking for a second.
Second.
Now we can discuss.
Yeah, just I'll weigh in initially, and that is I was taken by Martha's comment, I think earlier, about the fact that a reserve or this account allows for quick action, and I think again, kind of echoing comments by others, that we don't know what the year presents in the upcoming year because of everything going on. I like the idea of quick action, and I think also too, we have commented on the observation about the Board of Finance exercising its judgment in lieu of the Board of Education on certain line by line items. And I think I'm kind of moved by those two sentiments, that I would not reduce it in that fashion.
My response is that the Board of Finance seemed to be more than willing to reduce the budget control on the Board of Education. Several of them have mentioned it, and that's actually nothing more than a Board of Education contingency account.
I guess my point is just, you know, I don't agree with what they're doing on the Board of Ed, nor do I agree with this. It just seems like it's just too, again, a case of two wrongs.
Well, again, my concern is that I want to ensure, would you consider moving it to 200,000? I just want to ensure that when civilian dispatch does come back, and I have a feeling a deal's already been cut, that it's not coming out of that contingency account, so it doesn't come before the RTM. So, and it's something I would support should it come before it. But I think the voices need to be heard.
Jack,
I agree with you. I agree with you, Jack. Sorry, go ahead.
So what makes you assume that the Board of Finance would just automatically approve that without going, you know, before the RTM for the funds for something like that?
Because we've already defended ourselves to keep our authority to vote on this budget.
Yeah. Well, I would not like to take the flexibility away from the Board of Finance to react quickly, and also in terms of the flexibility that the Board of Selectmen budget has. I could be out of date here and wrong, but I think they can only make transfers of up to 5,000 without any approval. So, you know, that doesn't give them a lot of latitude to react to things on their own.
Well, my flexibility is that I have not seen during my time, and Martha, maybe you have more information, but I do believe that the transfers would be presented from one line item to another, and presented to the Board of Finance. So I still think that they have some flexibility there in the fact that they would just transfer and get the Board of Finance approval. I would like to bring it so that my concern, and as I said, I'm willing to give them some flexibility, and I understand the need for flexibility, but I have a big concern that they haven't used it for the last 2 years, as well as the fact that this is just too much of a contingency for them to have. And I want to make sure that on large dollar items, such as this or other things, that they're coming back to the RTM. So that's what I'm saying. I'll even reduce it to just, 200, or have their balance be 200 or 250. But it ensures that that this area has had some consideration. I don't think they have to move that quickly on anything that's coming up of a large dollar amount. Because if it's really large, it should be coming through the RTM anyway. And we can have our special meetings if need be.
Yeah, Jack, I want to support what you're doing on this. I think the principle here is that all we're asking is the Board of Finance to treat the budget items similarly situated in the same way. I think that's fair. I think to potentially reduce it, maybe not by 300,000, by 200,000, would give plenty of flexibility for the board to be able to be responsive to ad hoc needs as they may come up. But the RTM needs a voice. I feel compelled to rehash some of the things we talked about at the beginning, which is this committee came up with a plan which would have avoided all of the difficult decisions that have had to be made, and that especially the Board of Ed is going to have to make, because the Board of Finance did not consider a reasoned, logical, common sense approach. In fact, all we asked the Board of Finance to do was to live by their own criteria, and they chose not to. Given that situation, I think what you're asking for is eminently reasonable. And I think, again, I would love to see better communication between ourselves and the Board of Finance, so that these type of situations don't come up again. I think this proposal you're making is designed to try to move us in that direction.
Jack, I support your proposal.
I do too. I have I want, of course, the town to have flexibility in the event that we have COVID-related emergencies, or God forbid, at this point, some other kind of emergency that we don't even know about yet. But I don't want there to be really large expenditures without any sort of approval process from the RTM, because I think we represent the largest swath of the town.
I agree with you, Jack. I had a question, like to Mike's point, his concern about, cutting reserves. How much, maybe Martha's the one to answer this. Have you, in your role as a Board of Finance member in the past, have you ever needed to draw down $400,000? Like the fact that there's been accruals and there's a sufficient number in case of emergency. And don't forget, we just, they have the ability to go issue 10 million in notes if they need to, plus all the other capital accounts that need to be scrubbed. There's plenty of resources to pull from, but I give, particularly in light of the fact that the RTM was almost stripped of their power, it would be, my radar's a little bit up in terms of wanting to make sure that the RTM does weigh in on something of a significant amount. And it could, and on the floor of the RTM, you'll probably get overwhelming support for it, but I think there needs to be, more than ever, the RTM needs to have a voice. I'm mindful that we have a role here.
Yeah, I was thinking back, and the only thing I can remember, and I'm probably forgetting a lot, is there's a dam shared with Stamford and a big leak developed, and this is more of a capital project, but I think we had to move over 200,000 quickly to take care of that situation. But that's the only example I can give you at this point.
Oh, and that's a capital project that you could bond
And that's
for.
a capital project, exactly.
Jack,
The only other
what's
one that I'm aware of, and it was based upon a timing, and I know that several RTM members were quite upset by it, even though the project was an excellent project and made a heck of a lot of sense, was the purchase of the streetlights from Eversource. I just, with all honesty, do not recall what the cost of that was. For some reason, like $80,000 or something like that sticks in my mind. I don't know if Mark
That's what
has
I'm
a
remembering,
better.
Jack.
No, I don't remember
that
that.
ballpark. Yeah, I think it was 5
Yeah,
figures.
that's what I thought.
Yeah.
So it was about 80,000, and people were upset with that. And that was a timing issue because it had to be done by September. But there's not big items that are going in there. So if we're putting down 200,000, that's more than enough to handle anything major that's going on, and anything else, that's bigger than that. They really should be coming back to us.
Agreed.
Jack, what's the history here? What's this balance been at in the past? I don't have a frame of reference to know if it's gotten larger.
It's been about 400,000 since the dinosaurs were around. It's been that forever. And they just don't use it a lot. This year, I think, when I was looking at the balance, I think it's less than 50,000. I'm going to say something else first. Our Board of Selectmen and our town administrator and the Board of Ed are pretty good in figuring out if they have something that they have coming up, where else in their budget they can find funds. And they do that first before they ever come back to the Board of Finance. Now, they may come back to the Board of Finance if you're on the Board of Selectmen side to get a transfer. But, let's give a little bit of, credit to Kate, Jen, and Jamie in being able to manage their budget and move things around. There's transfers going on throughout the course of the year without saying, oh, I'm over here and I need this money. So I think 200,000 is a reasonable amount should something major come up. But anything over 100,000, I really think that they should be able to come back. To tell how good we've been, and this committee is, I want to remind you that we approved a change in the verbiage and the authorization to refund certain bonds for approximately $2.1 million the same night that the Board of Finance was meeting and doing the same thing so that we could get it into the next meeting. And they actually, instead of having to do the refunding, or the purchase using the unassigned general fund balance in January, they were able to do it in December and saved another $30,000, $40,000. We react quickly. We keep our ear to the sort of like railroad track to know what's going on, and we have that good relationship to know anything that's happening. So I think that, the same way that the Board of Finance told the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen that if there's a good case, you have to trust us. I think the Board of Finance has to be able to trust the RTM for the same thing. That we will
Jack,
move
I
quickly.
agree. Jack, I agree. I just wanted to point out real quickly that if someone mentioned that the budget control in the Board of Ed is looked at as a contingency, that is currently budgeted for $265,000 on over $100 million budget. And the Board of Selectmen budget is significantly less than that. And this contingency is $400,000.
Any further discussion, or are we up for vote? And so I will restate my motion. I'm moving that we reduce item 20-15B by 200,000 specific to the Board of Finance contingency. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All right.
Lisa?
Yes?
Yeah, got a second.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can we, for those who I know who have concerns, is that a good number? Does that make you feel as if they still have some flexibility?
Well, I was going to say, just in light of the uncertainty we're facing, I could see my way to 100,000 reduction, but 200, I don't know, seems like a lot to me.
Kelly,
I'm leaning that way as well. You know, to send a signal or a message, which I'm never really a big fan of, in this particular environment, to cut a contingency is making me uncomfortable. I do know that when I sat in on the most recent meeting of the Public Works Committee, which the chair was kind enough to invite me to, and Ed gave a nice wrap up of operations within Public Works, that budget is tight, in my opinion, has been for a number of years operationally. And he cited a couple of areas where they are seeing but higher expenses already related to COVID-19, specifically staffing, additional staffing at the what do we call it now, the recycle facility, and also extra cleaning at the town hall, the protocols in place. And that's just one little snippet. I shouldn't call it a snippet, it's a big department. But I'm not privy to what other areas are seeing higher costs, but I do know, or it appears the operating budget's fairly tight. And so in this environment, I am nervous cutting something that is a contingency when we've got emergency services, fire, and town hall operations, all in a rapid response type of situation, all could be called upon.
Mark, I hear
So
you,
I want to support this, Jack, but I just hesitate for that.
All right, so
Mark, wait, Jack, let me talk. Mark, I hear you, but you just mentioned a bunch of COVID expenses, which is exactly what the Board of Finance said you should not budget for and that you have to come back to them for. And again, I will say this contingency is significantly larger percentage-wise than the stated contingency that we're calling budget control is on the Board of Ed side.
I have a question, Martha, and Mark. If we were to move it to a reduction of 125,000, which would still give them 275. I feel like I'm on Shark Tank trying to negotiate a deal. Would that ease your minds a little bit?
You know, I'd just be happy to stay at the reduction of 100,000. I'm not even thrilled doing that, but I'm trying to go with the flow here.
I'm willing to.
As will I, Jack. As will I. I'm not fond of sending signals. The past practice.
I'm not looking to send a signal. Honestly, I'm not. I'm looking to reduce something that hasn't been used, and the fact that I want to have a little bit of assurance that anything large is coming back to the RTM for its vote. So I'm
not looking to send signals either. I'm looking for consistency between the budgets and the way we budget, and there's no consistency.
I'm willing to ensure the passage to reduce the amount of the cut to 100,000. So I'm willing to amend. Okay, fine. Are we ready to vote?
Okay, I think we are. Are you ready? All right. Mark?
Yes.
Harry? Harry? Okay. Martha?
Yes.
Louisa? Jack?
Yes.
Myself, I'm a yes. James?
Yes.
Beth?
Yes.
Bob? Bob? Bob, you're on mute. All right. Iris?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Thank you. Stacy?
Yes.
Bert?
Yes.
Lisa?
I'm a yes.
All right. We have 12 yeses and 3 absences. Thirteen yeses, sorry, 13 yeses. And I don't have a vote from Barry, Louisa, or Bob. Okay, that's what I have.
Okay,
It carries.
let's move on to the next item. Item C, resolve, oh, then we have to vote on this whole thing, I'm sorry. Back to item B. Resolve that an appropriation of $45,265,691 is hereby made in the general fund for the selectmen's operating budget.
Second.
Do I have any no's?
Who moved that? That's Jack?
I'm sorry. No, I can't move. I need somebody to move it.
I'll move it.
And I'll second.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. It gets easier from here. Do I have any no votes? Do I have any abstentions? Hearing none, this amended amount passes unanimously.
And can you repeat the amended amount, Jack, please?
Sure. $45,265,691.
Thank you.
All right. On to C. Resolve that an appropriation of $102,496,378 is hereby made in the general fund for the education operating budget. Do I have somebody moving that?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Any conversation that we haven't made? Is there anybody? Go ahead.
I would just like to say, I already said what I said earlier. I would just like to add that unfortunately, we can't add back to this budget. So I will be voting in support of this budget under duress.
I would like to add to that. And say it's similar to our colleagues on the RTM Education Committee last night voting for this, but with great reservations based on procedural issues with how the Board of Finance proceeded in this area.
Do I hear any potential cuts to this budget? I have to ask. Hearing none, are we ready to vote?
All right, here we go.
I'm going to do it in the reverse way.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any no's to this budget? Are there any abstentions in this budget? Hearing none, 20-15C, Resolved that an appropriation for $102,496,378 is hereby made in the general fund for the education operating budget. Okay. That brings us to D. I have total reductions of 300.
21,000.
Right. I have total above is reducing the amount of $147,862.69 is hereby reduced by a total amount of $318,000. The composition of that is the Board of Finance contingency for $100,000 for the maintenance account, $72,000 for the various park and rec, $46,000 for the fire fence around the tower. Comes out, thereby reduces the number in D by $318,000, thereby making that number, if you give me 1 second, $147,544,069 for the purposes of meeting the expenses of the town of Darien for the fiscal year commencing July 1st, 2020 and ending June 30th, 2021, as shown in by the budget on this day approved. Any further discussion on that? If not, can I have somebody move it? Please. Liz moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
Peter? Are we
Jack,
ready to vote?
well, wait a minute. I think the 100 and D, the figure that's currently there now, 147,862,000, et cetera, that's really just an addition of B and C. I don't believe, run the arithmetic through, but I don't believe the capital is included in that figure, so you shouldn't include the capital reductions, I don't think. Double check my arithmetic here, but I added 45, 365, and 102, 496, and I think I came up with the 147. So I think you only take 100,000 out of there.
No, I think that we have to take the transfer of the capital. So it's both the B and C, but I also think, oh, maybe it is. Let me just.
Let me double check here, but.
Because you also have the capital and debt service added in.
496.
Go to Schedule B.
Well, I added, see, boy, my arithmetic. I keep coming up with a different number every time I add things. Okay.
Could be because it's 10 o'clock, Martha.
It could be.
Oh, that's
blame
when
it
I
on my
first
calculator. No, when I add B and C, I come up 147,862,069. So I think that does not include
yes,
the capital.
Yes, your B and C
equals D. So if we reduce B by 100,000, then
no, we have
D
to.
is.
Here's the thing: the selectmen's operating budget includes the Board of Selectmen operating budget of $34,748,000. Capital equal to 1.7 million plus debt service of 8.9 million. So the reductions that we have done to both the operating and the capital has to be reduced. So it has to be reduced by $318,000 because those are transfers that are in the total Board of Selectmen budget. Total
Well,
Board of
okay, I was gonna say, I'm looking at what was sent in the mail to me, resolution, whatever it is, 20-15. And I see the total figure that they have for D, and it's just the summation of B and C.
Right.
So unless they made an error, I don't
No,
believe
no.
you include the capital for non-recurring expenses in D.
What I'm saying is that
Maybe I'm not understanding.
yes, what we should have done under B is reduce. Let's go back to B. All right.
Okay.
B, this was my mistake. Good catch, Mark. The 45,365,000 plus change has three numbers in it. The Board of Selectmen operating budget of 34,748,000.
Right.
Debt service of 8.9 million, and capital transfer of 1.7 million. So since we have made adjustments to both capital and operating, the amount in B should have been 45,365,691 minus 318,123. Boom. Sorry. Plus this minus this. That number should have initially, I'm sorry, we're going to have to go back to B. The proper number for B is 45,047,691. Then you're right, it's B and C together, but it still requires a reduction of 319. 318 rather.
Okay.
All right. So, or relax. Okay. So the combination of D being B and C is $147,544,069.
Right, correct.
Okay. Can somebody please move that?
So moved.
All right, a second?
I have Stacy a second.
Oh, that works.
So, there's not a lot of further discussion on that since we showed that I can't add, but Martha can. Are there any no's? Any abstentions? Hearing none, Resolution D passes. So now we're on Resolution 20-15E. And that is the establishment of the mill rate. And I have recalculated the revised mill rate based upon our adjustments to have the mill rate now being 16.33, a reduction of 3 basis points, which is about right based upon what we're doing. I will say that part of the problem here with what went on, and I'll be providing another analysis, is the growth of the adjusted grand list should have generated about $1.6 million in incremental revenue to the town this year. However, by reducing the collection rate from 99.356, which was last year, it would have been higher this year, to 98.911, which was the collection rate during the Great Recession. That is costing the town, in theory, $635,000. So the growth in the grand list is only generating about $941,000. The collection rate has been so good in the last couple of years that Kate and the Board of Jamie and the Board of Selectmen actually reduced the interest and fees on late payments of taxes by $25,000. Nothing has been added back on the income side based upon this change. But for our purposes here, we will be voting on a revised mill rate of 16.33. Do I have somebody moving that?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Second.
Peter,
All right. Any discussion? Hearing none. Are there any no votes? Are there any abstentions? This then passes. Getting into Resolution 20-15F. In the past, this has been a $5 million authorization to the Board of Selectmen to issue tax anticipation notes for $5 million. A conversation that I participated in with Jamie, our first selectman, John Zagroski, Chair of the Board of Finance, Kate and Jen. We were talking about this, and I suggested, based upon the fact that we are in fact going to give some deferment and other things like that, and the Board of Finance felt that they were going to be lowering the collection rate, that it might make sense to increase this from the $5 million in prior years. We've never used it, by the way. But, you know, being conservative and wanting to provide an extra safety net, Jen suggested $10 million, all on the telephone call agreed. And so this year it's $10 million. It costs us nothing. There is no, there is no like line of credit. This just says that based upon the receipt of future taxes at any time during the course of fiscal year 21, we can go and they can issue up to $10 million to cover any unanticipated loss. So can I have somebody move that?
So moved.
Second?
Peter moved, Stacy seconded.
Sounds good. Is there any conversation or discussion?
Nope.
Hearing none, we're ready to vote. Are there any no votes? Are there any abstentions? Hearing none, this motion carries. The last item on 2015G is the transfer to other funds need to be made. The amounts are listed in the document. I can read them, but these are all self-funding funds, and with the exception of one of the funds that I'm getting to right now, because I had it in the write-up. This item includes 5 different appropriations from different funds. All of the appropriations are self-funding, which means the fund that collects the revenues, user fees, or taxes automatically feeds the expenses for the services which it provides. The sewer funds, excluding the sewer capital funds, reimburse the town for sewer-related town debt, which was part of the Board of Selectmen budget the RTM earlier approved, and that total amount was $351,972 for fiscal year 21. Any conversation? Any discussion? Hearing none, are we ready to vote? Are there any no votes?
Wait, do we have a motion first of all?
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. We do not.
Okay.
So
I'll
A motion?
move.
Stacy got it. I hear a
Second,
second. I got a Martha for a second.
Super.
Okay.
Are we ready to vote? Everybody's ready to vote? Good.
I think we are.
Sounds
Yep.
good. Are there any no votes? Are there any abstentions? Hearing none, that motion passes. I think the last thing is
Jack,
that, yes,
do we need to go back and change the amount in 2015B if all of the capital
did.
expenses we did it?
yeah.
Okay. Just checking. I just didn't realize that was a separate vote. Okay.
Okay. That only leaves minutes. Do I have a motion to move the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a
Lisa?
second?
Second.
You-
It's Iris.
Iris, okay, yep.
All in favor? Just say aye.
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 Aye. There's no opposed? In the past, I have always invited people from this committee for the excellent work that we've done to the Goose at the end of the session. Being that we're in the middle of a pandemic, we can arrange for a virtual drink. You just have to bring your own. I do want to thank everyone for their hard work and all the effort that they've put in, and I can only say that all of you just are outstanding. And I'm just proud to be able to be part of such a wonderful, diverse, intelligent collection of people. That being said, I'd like to thank Cecil Wade for his patience, his expertise in doing this. Jim Cameron wanted me to remind Cecil to give him a copy of the recorded amount, as if Cecil was not going to do that. So with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn this meeting.
One thing before you do that, Jack. First of all, for myself at least, and probably everybody else, I'd like to thank Mike Heitz for taking minutes, because it's no small job. And having done it 2 years in a row, I was happy to have Mike take over it. The second thing is I'd like to thank you for your time and your relentless efforts on behalf of the town and the RTM. You know, I appreciate what you do for the town, and I hope everybody else does.
Thank you.
Goes for me, Jack, too.
Second.
Goes for me.
Second.
Yep.
Here, here.
Thank you. I second that, Jack.
I will tell you, my job is made easy because all I'm doing is being a face of some very, very competent people who share a same vision of working for the taxpayers and for transparency and trying to do best for the town. So thank you. With that, all have
Do I hear a
one-
motion? Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Yes, I did. Did I
Okay,
hear
thank
it?
you.
Do we have a second? Can we continue and end the meeting?
You got it.
Who's motioning? Liz moved, Peter seconded. I saw their
Okay.
hands raised.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.